You are now doing less with John and Jeff, and may I say, John, you have taken do less to heart. It looks like you haven't shaved in maybe 2 weeks.
All right, that's fair. I haven't. I figure what better time to try to grow the meager amount of facial hair that I can when I'm not going to be seeing anyone for probably months.
I gotta say, looks like you got some nice peach fuzz right there.
Thanks. I have been doing less.
I think
Unlike the
we've all been
Fed.
doing a little less. That's true, unlike the Fed, but you know, I can't say I'm shocked.
Right. So today is Thursday, April 9th. And the announcements just keep coming.
It's not look
Um,
good.
it started off as like, wow, every time they would come out with something, to me it was like, I can't believe they could do that. Can't believe they could do that. And now it's at the point where I'm like, all right, I like know they can't do that, but they're doing it anyway.
Right.
It's like,
Dude,
are we all
there's
just gonna stand around and not talk about this?
dude, it's so much.
We'll
You're
talk
right. It's
about
so
it.
much at this point. I almost like don't care anymore because it's like it just seems like they're. I used to follow like every move by the Fed, but now they're doing so much that it's like, all right, they can just do whatever they want. So I'm
Yeah.
just, whatever.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was just thinking about this today. The difference between me, 4 weeks into the quarantine and 1 week into the quarantine was like the first week I was like glued to like the markets. Like I was
Mhm.
like, how are the markets reacting to this news? Oh, this other piece of news came out. How are the markets reacting to that? Well, now I'm like stuff like today that comes out, which we'll talk about a little bit, comes out, and I'm just like, oh, the markets are up 1%. I can't even call them markets anymore. That's something you told me. You said like I don't think market is the appropriate term anymore, and I was like, it's so true. That completely reflects how I feel right now. It's like I don't really care about what's happening in treasuries, what's happening in stocks, what's happening in uh, you know almost everything, because I'm just like, what is this? What of these movements is real, and what is just artificial buyers from the Fed, from the government propping up prices and diminishing volatility. Like it's like fake. It's like
Yeah,
fake
it's pretty
fake markets.
meaningless. A lot of it at this point, like I guess you could just try to like go along the Fed, I guess, and just buy everything you think they're gonna buy. But that's just not. That feels like dirty to me.
Yeah. Um so the announcement that they came out with today was that they're going to be purchasing uh high yield corporate debt,
Hmm.
which is junk bonds.
Hmm.
Um so that's along the line. They've already announced that they're going to be purchasing equities, which I know I was making a big deal about at the time because I thought that was completely unprecedented. We've only really ever seen that in Japan, which was like this massive experiment that didn't really go well. So I was like, what's going to happen? And then now they're moving into junk bonds, which is like uh it's a move to that is like completely I don't know, unprecedented is losing its value. It's losing its like meaning at this point, but it's just like to do that is such a moral hazard. I don't think we should get into that as much, but it's just like another move that they've made. That's just like, how much good can this cause? Like, this is it's it's such a market destroying fake way to operate the financial sector, financialization in the economy. It's like how can they do that? Why are they doing that?
I mean, it seems like they can do whatever they want because it doesn't seem like anyone cares. So, like, this kind of like relates to some other things I was thinking about too. Is like, we have the Constitution, and the Constitution prevents certain things from being done, but there's all sorts of stuff that our government and like the Federal Reserve, for example, does that should be in violation of the Constitution. Like, just the basic fact that our money is not on a uh, gold standard.
Standard.
And
Yeah.
look, I'm not like huge on gold. Like I'm not one of those people that thinks like gold is like the perfect form of currency. I actually think there could be alternatives that would be better. And I actually think you could have a fiat system that does work. But my point is, this was prevented by the Constitution for good reason because of what we're seeing now. That they knew this is the kind of stuff that happens when you basically hand government the keys to just create money as they please. And so that was why that was in the Constitution. But clearly no one cares. So the Constitution only matters as much as people care about it. Like, if the overwhelming majority of people want something that violates the Constitution, we've seen the Supreme Court will find ways to reinterpret it or whatever and just get it is what that people want done. And so really, like, the value of your institutions is only as much as people's faith in them and believe in them and how much they think they're important. And I just don't think people give a shit about either the Constitution or, whatever. I get a sense that more people are waking up to the Fed, though. Some people think, what they're doing is they should do even more. Like, they should just print. That's like the MMT people. But I think there's more and more people being like, all right, this seems a little crazy. The amount of money they're creating, everything they're buying, like this, they're like I guess the acceleration of it is starting to bring more attention to them. Whereas I feel like before they've been flying under the radar.
Yeah, I had an interaction with someone on Twitter that is kind of leading on to what you're talking about. He was someone who probably may not know as much about the Fed or about economic policy, but he made he made a tweet that was like, this is kind of absurd. The amount they're just kind of creating, the amount of money that they're just kind of creating. Is 2 trillion like a special, like, he was like basically calling out, does anyone know more about this? Like, why is 2 trillion the right amount? And 10 trillion, for example, would be like crazy, way too much. And I responded and I was just like, I was kind of talking to him about, I was kind of trying to explain. And when he asked that, I was just like, dude, I can't answer that because honestly, I think 2 trillion is too much.
Right,
any amount of printing. Like, I was trying to, I forget what I first engaged with, but anyway, it kind of came to that. He kind of just was like, okay, so why is 2 trillion okay? And I was just like, it's a good question. I think more people should be asking that. I think there's probably some econ PhD somewhere at the Treasury or somewhere at the Fed who's telling their advisor or telling their, higher ups, like, yes, this is okay. This is what we should do, not that. More printing, more, don't raise taxes. We need more print. So there's like these high educated in quotation marks, econ majors, econ PhDs that are kind of ruling policy. And it's just like, the debate in my mind is still open, but in a lot of people's minds, the debate is over. It's like, this is the right way to do. We have to listen to the politicians and the
Right.
high up economic
And the
economists.
Fed bears no costs, no repercussions for their actions whatsoever. So it's impossible really for them.
They're not even elected.
Right. Like, it's impossible for them to basically say to themselves, what are their limits? Like, when a company goes, like, if Coca-Cola goes, all right, how many cans of Coke should we produce? And someone's like, oh, all of them. Just keep them going. They're gonna be like, no, that's so much money. There's not gonna be any people wanting that. So, like, they have restrictions on what they create. But the Fed, when it creates money, and we know there's gonna be costs of this, they don't actually bear the costs. Whereas Coca-Cola would if they create too many of their product. So there's just no driving force in the other direction against what they're doing until, like, maybe public opinion is so negative of what they're doing, then maybe they can get some blowback. But it seems like, to me, the only people that care about the Fed are people that are benefiting from it, and they're just saying, "Yeah, keep going." There's no like, I don't know. There's people like us, but
Yeah.
a lot of us are just talking to ourselves.
It's really hard. It's like it's not understood well enough by enough people to have the national debate, in my opinion, because this is kind of something we were talking about. It's like, why is there so much unknown about economics? Like, how can you have a period like the Great Recession and have some people so sure what caused the Great Recession in 2008, and so sure about the solution that they're going into this next crisis with, surety on their side. They're like, we know what worked before. In fact, the only thing that limited our potency last time was we didn't do enough. We didn't do enough printing fast enough.
Right.
So we know this time we've learned that to do more faster is the solution. Like and that's our policymakers that have gone on 60 Minutes and
Right.
said this kind of stuff. And it's like, whoa. There's a good amount of people I bet you would poll across the country. Maybe they're not active about it, but if they got this whole thing laid out to them, they'd be like, wait a minute, I don't like that. I don't want that.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
where's the representation? Like that's,
And again, like when they say it worked last time, what they're going by is like GDP numbers and stock market and real estate values. And this is a lot of stuff that this doesn't benefit a lot of average people in America. Like a lot of these numbers that got, inflated back up have nothing to do with the average American. So it's like,
right.
they're completely living in their own delusion with their own their models, never questioning the assumptions that go into these models, and just go, oh yeah, it worked. Look at our models. Look, it was perfect success. It's like if you just went to go talk to someone who got like hit by the Great Recession and has never recovered. It's not even like they recovered and then got set back again. They've been there since. Just a simple conversation with a person like that is like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I'll always remember the response from the guy I was referencing that went on 60 Minutes, Neil Kashkari, had a tweet a couple months ago when he was kind of pressed on this. Someone challenged him, was like, the Fed kind of touts this position of like, oh, we want more inflation. So someone went to Neil Kashkari on Twitter and was like, go into a grocery store in Alabama and tell them you're doing policy, you want more inflation, you want prices to go up higher. And he said, yeah, I'll go into Alabama and tell them that because we've created the inflation that led to their higher wages. They have higher wages, and then he mentions like the real wages, and I'm like, you're talking about real wages in the same conversation you want higher inflation. Real wages are lower after inflation,
Right?
So it's like it's just like this kind of. I do want to go back to one of the things you were building up on. You were saying how they're unchecked. These policymakers are unchecked, and it's almost even worse than that because they're unchecked and their metrics that are kind of meaningless to most of the population.
Mm-hmm.
They can kind of rig them in a way. So not only are they they have no feedback. They have the feedback that they have. They can manipulate to the way they want. So it's like almost even more like devilish, more kind of messed up. It's like it's not only am I going to tell you what's right, and not only am I going to enact the policy the way I want with no recourse, no backlash whatsoever. If it doesn't work out, I'm just going to tell people that we want, if my policy is for more inflation and we don't get more inflation, I'm just going to tell people that we want more inflation so we can do more of my policy. So it's like almost, not only is it no backlash, it's like the backlash that they do have, it's manipulatable by them. Like they can just say what they want.
And like at the heart of it is the fact that, they have no competition, right? They are this, branch of the government. They're not competing with anyone. They have no constraints whatsoever. It's like if you put just some Joe Blow and you taught him a bunch of sparring moves and you had him spar against a dummy, he could probably think he's the shit. Like he could be like, "Oh, I'm great at fighting. I'm it's awesome. I learned all these. I'm sick at." But until you actually throw him in the ring with someone else and he gets his ass kicked, he's never gonna know like that he's
Hmm.
actually not that good. That's what competition is. It's like you don't know who the best in the world is until you actually compete and you figure it out. And like that's why capitalism works. It's because you let people's ideas, you put them to the test. And the Fed doesn't compete with anyone. They just do whatever they want. And if it works or it doesn't matter. There's no drawbacks to it.
Yeah, and so leading up to this economic event, this kind of crisis that we're dealing with, um, before this, like in normal times, I'll say, so the last like year and a half before this, the Fed, the way they operate, I mean, they have to make they have like 4 meetings a year where they like set the policy, they
Mhm.
set the interest rates. Um, I think that I don't have the data on this, but just from watching, I think that if you would have just taken the majority futures on the interest rate leading into that meeting, and you just set the policy according to the futures, like if the futures were anticipating a rate cut, and then there's just an automatic computer program that says, okay, rate cut. Who knows? Maybe the Fed even has this computer program running, or they have the futures up and they say, okay, what does the market expect is going to happen? Let's do that. We don't want to piss everyone off.
I
So
mean,
it's like,
that's in effect what they're doing. So it doesn't. They could say no, 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 that's not what we're doing, but that is what they're doing. So
so, so in normal time, what I'm getting at is in normal times, they like don't have a job. They just kind of are operating under this, uh, operating as the market is dictating. And then in a period like this where it's like, okay, we need someone to save us. We need some policy. We need, a wise person to get up at the helm and tell us, what we need to. Well, they're just throwing the kitchen sink at whatever's moving. They're just buying up. There's like unprecedented. Okay, try this, try this, try this, and it's like, well, if it works, it's like you probably have your name remembered. If it doesn't work, it's like probably no one will remember your name.
right.
It's like there's no system of incentive. You're just kind of, so that to me sounds like a job that's very cushy and easy. You get paid well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't blame them for wanting the job. I just
It's
blame
like
the job for existing.
it's like an entirely experimental thing that's like that has the most impact on like hardworking average Americans,
Hmm.
and we're just like um, we just have to like deal with what they tell us is the right thing to be, even if you disagree with it.
Yeah.
You said to me, why isn't economics like quantum physics? It's like in quantum physics, we have an understanding of like these very, very intense, like hard to understand concepts.
Mhm.
And my response was, I think economics is like quantum physics in a way, but the only difference is that not every single politician and every other person is trying to implement
Right.
theory over quantum physics. Like if people don't understand quantum physics, they kind of stay away and they say, "I'll leave that to the experts." But when it comes to economics, it's like everyone knows what's right, and everybody who, yeah,
Right. And it's just like, I guess in economics, it's like, uh, well, here's the funny thing, right? Is like, if you're right about economics, you don't need to do anything. If you understand it, there's nothing to do. There's no planning. There's no nothing.
right,
There's no policy. You don't
yeah,
actually do. If you understand economics really well, there's no career for you really. Not really. I mean, maybe you could be
yeah.
economic advisor, but what do? You just, oh, should we intervene? No. If the answer, just like you could literally just have a post-it note on your office door that just says no. Or, it's like, oh, should we do this? And the answer is no. It's that's it. Like that's economics. It's just let people be free
Yeah.
to decide. Don't let people steal from each other. Okay, that's you need that. But it's like there's really nothing to do, right? So it like that's what's so funny about it is, you know, a bunch of people who don't even really know anything about economics is like, oh, we should do this, we should do that, and even the experts are like, we should do this, we should do that. It's like you don't need to know anything about economics. You just need to not get in the fucking way.
Yeah. It makes me think of a blog I was reading, I think it was Tim Ferriss. He was talking about why companies, or it was Tim Ferriss interview, why companies need a chief incentive officer, which is
Hmm.
not very common role. It's like a person that can analyze people's incentives and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that your company is operating in a way where people are incentivized to do well,
Hmm.
right? And there's a lot of examples. I'm not going to get into exactly it's kind of straightforward what the incentive officer would be doing, making decisions on.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's what a good economist would fill that role. Would be like, would analyze like, oh, this person analyze their incentives, like just like the analysis of incentives. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like is where economics has it's like and like if you know like Jeff is saying, if you know economics, you know that you have to let people operate under their incentives. Like
Mm-hmm.
incentives will drive everyone to do what is in their own interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people are incentivized to do the wrong thing, well, that's when you start getting straying away from the past, from the path that you want.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have like a good economist to fulfill that role, they could see like, oh, our employees are incentivized to not, compete with each other in this area or whatever, and you're getting really not really good results in your this sector of your company, this section of your company, and like the economists be like, you're not getting enough market interaction between those employees. I
Mm-hmm.
think that would be a interesting applied economics.
Like a free market is the best thing you can have, right? But that doesn't mean it's going to produce everything you want all the time. And so like the free market will lay you off. The free market will have
Hmm.
shortages. The free market will have stock market crashes. The free market will have real estate crashes. The free market will have bank runs. These are all products of the free market. It's not a utopia. And when it produces results that people don't like, they think, "Oh, we could have avoided this." And it's like, "Yes, maybe you could have avoided that, but what other problems are you creating that you're not thinking about every time you try to step in and fix one thing?" It's kind of like if you had like a leaky bucket or whatever, and you're just patching one hole and it just forces the water out another hole or whatever. So it's people often look at like they focus on the specific problem and they don't look at all the other problems they've created by fixing that one. And so it's like the best solution is just to let everyone act in their own interest because each person has the most information available to themselves. And for you to dictate for them what they should do, you're never
Hmm.
going to do a better job of it because you don't know their circumstances as well as they do. And so that's why free market always works better, but it's not always going to produce the results we want. And so I think that's why there's just such this driving force for people to step in is because every time it goes wrong, they feel like, oh, we could have prevented this. It's like, yes, you could have, but what else are you gonna? You're gonna cause something else to go wrong.
Hmm.
So it's like that's what they don't consider.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, like the Fed can prevent all stock market crashes forever, right? But it's like they could also cause a dollar crisis. So, there's trade
Right.
offs, right? And people don't often look at the trade offs or the opportunity costs or whatever, the unseen.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the stock market, like preventing a stock market crash.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, "Oh my gosh, the stock market's going up." You know, what is it? What is the cause? What's the purpose? What or
Mm-hmm.
like why? What do people see? What is the market anticipating? They're expecting a V bottom in the economy. Like a
Mm-hmm.
massive like return to normal, and it's just like, or the Fed doesn't want the stock market to go down, so they're like backstopping it. It's just
Right.
like it's not that complicated. It's like the Fed wants the stock market to not go down, so they're making it go up. They can do that.
Right.
People don't like to think about that because it's like their retirement and they're like, oh, I'm a good investor. Like people on Wall Street think like, oh, I made all this money in the last 10 years because I'm smarter than
It's like
people that aren't on Wall Street.
that Monopoly experiment where it's like they gave a bunch of people a head start in Monopoly, and then like they win, and they go, "Oh, how'd you win?" And they go, "Oh, strategy."
Yeah. Um, but the truth of the matter is the Fed can, like you said, prevent every single stock. Now that we've seen that they're willing to buy equities, yeah, they haven't bought, um, you know, stocks
Stock, but I mean
yet.
they've like for some of these for some of these businesses, high yield, like their high yield bonds, their corporate bonds, like this is their lifeline, right? Like this is how they stay in business. So for the Fed to come in and step in and buy their bonds, that keeps that business afloat. And if their bonds are junk, there's a reason for that. There's something wrong with this business. I mean, not necessarily wrong, but it's like there's something with this business that makes it highly risky. And so like there's a reason people are cautious with highly risky businesses. It's not right for someone to go, no, make sure this highly speculative, highly risky business doesn't go out of business. That's the point of taking risks, is you got to see what works, what fails. And so for you to be like, no risky businesses should ever fail. It's like, all right, well then how are we going to know what works?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just malinvestment. That's what malinvestment is. Mm-hmm. And people are so happy to say no one could see this coming. Like you hear that over and over. No one could see this coming. It's not anyone's fault that these businesses are failing. It's like, yes, you can say it's not someone's fault and let the business fail.
Right.
Like it's not like that's it's not the worst case scenario. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Losing your job, losing your business is not the worst case scenario. Putting all your eggs in one basket is not a good way to live your life. Like if you are heavily reliant on your job to survive, then that should, I mean, that's, you can make the argument, well, yeah, that was a decision people had to make 10 years ago and they're not in that position now. It's like, okay, but you have to talk about, like, now's the time to talk about it. Your eggs should not have all been in one basket. Like this failed and you had everything invested in it. And the other thing is, it's not like no one saw this. It's not that no one saw this coming. There was some entities like I just saw Wimbledon, the tennis tournament in England. They had an insurance policy. Did you read this one?
Nah.
Yeah, Wimbledon ever since SARS has been investing $2 million a year in an insurance policy, a pandemic insurance policy.
Wow.
So for 17 years, they've been putting $2 million a year out of their operating profit. That would have been just profit right to their shareholders, or, you know, the stakeholders of the...
Or they could have done share buybacks or whatever the hell.
Whatever. They put it in this insurance policy that paid out this year $144 million. Yeah, right around 140 million, I think. Which their revenue is like 280 million on a normal year.
Right.
So I think if you take into account, you know, their expenditure, I think that's like right around probably maybe a little bit more than what they would have their normal operating profit would have been. So it's like they're getting a massive payout because they had the, you know, forethought to put some money aside in the event that their literally 2 week per year revenue generating event could be canceled over something as exogenous as a pandemic. So I heard that example, and it's just like, it's not like it's impossible to see coming. Like there's always risk. Like you can always prepare for
and like insurance isn't even about predicting. It's not like they were predicting the coronavirus. No, they were just saying, okay, what are we sensitive to? We're sensitive to things that could shut down our, you know, very short span of like revenue generation every year. Okay, let's protect against that. That's all they're doing. It's just hedging, and like it's not a crazy thing to ask of people. Is to hedge themselves. So like trying to build this society of no one has to hedge, no one has to be careful, no one has to play it safe because it's not your fault. It's like that's not. Like you're living in fantasy land if you think that's achievable, because who's going to be smart enough to run this society to predict everything ahead of time so that we're prepared no matter what? Like it just doesn't exist. Like you can't expect this to happen.
Yeah, I think, and the thing is, people don't even realize what they're asking for. Like, for example, if you think that the real solution to this problem is this complete government overstepping of what is probably okay for a government to do. It's what's definitely okay for a government to do. And to tell everyone, stay in your house. It's illegal to leave your house, you know, stuff like that. And we're going to print a bunch of money and We're going to buy a bunch of stuff in the open market with unlimited printing presses, stuff like that. You say, okay, the government's our backstop. We need the government in the time like this. Well, you say, okay, if that's the solution, well, how could the government be more effective? Well, on the onset of this pandemic, the government could have been really early and say, there's no cases in the U.S. yet, but everybody go on lockdown. You know what I mean? And what if it's like, what if it is like a lesser flu?
Right.
You know, like no one knows at the time when
a lot of damage.
No, it caused less damage.
No, I'm saying the government could have caused a lot of damage by shutting down when it shouldn't have.
Yeah. What if it turns out the coronavirus has no impact to Americans for some reason? Our diets are different.
Right.
I don't know. Just think of this as a thought experiment. If the Americans were able to really be resistant to the strain of coronavirus, and then it came to America and it was a non-issue. Well, your solution of the government, if the government was able to front run this and really shut down everything before the onset, it's like, well, you don't know what's going to be a bad virus or what's going to be a non-issue. Like no one can make that decision, and if they do make that decision, people are sitting in their houses. They're more antsy than they are right now because they're like, this may not even be necessary. Right. Like at least for this example, people were like, okay, like I don't want people to die, so I'll stay home. It's kind of my decision, and the government's just like helping.
And most people I know, they're social distancing and doing whatever for one, their sake, probably first and foremost, and two, for the people around them that they care about's sake, probably higher on the list for some people, lower on the list for others. But like they're doing this all their own choice. Most people. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone who said, "Man, if it wasn't for the government, I would be doing this, that, and the like." That's not what I hear from people. And so I think essentially what's happening is people's own freedom to step back and do less and try to prevent the virus from spreading. That would have happened with or without the government. Then the government comes in and they say, we're shutting this down, we're shutting that down. And they go, look, we did it, guys. We saved everyone. And it's like, they didn't do anything. And in fact, they could be harming certain businesses that actually maybe could be operating in a safe way. Like, they just don't have, like we've said before, the government is just a brute force. Like they just go shut everything down. There's no nuance, right? Like what if there was a business that actually isn't putting anyone in jeopardy, but for whatever reason is considered non-essential and just gets, closed down because someone calls the fucking cops on them and says, shut them down. I see them operating. And it's like, that didn't have to happen. But it's just this heavy-handed approach that to me isn't needed because in fact, people don't want to spread the virus. They want to do what they can to make sure it doesn't spread. And only people themselves are going to know, I'm out of food. I can't pay rent. I got to do something. All right. At that point, they're more likely to die from their inability to work than they are the coronavirus. So it's like only that individual knows their, risk tolerance and their savings and like that, all that information is held by them and they know, I may go out and maybe I might infect someone that might hurt them and or I'll get myself infected and that might hurt me. But like, who are you to say, no, you sit home and starve? Like, what I mean? Like that doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah. It's interesting because the first episode we recorded about it, weeks or months ago, when the first outbreak started in Wuhan, our kind of policy was like, it might be good for a government to be able to shut down travel and shut down spread. Which I think it is the case because you don't want in an economy or in like society, you don't want people that, you may not have any choice, but like they could go off and live the risky life that they feel is okay for them, but then they come into contact with you and like you were relatively risk-free and you just this unfortunate confrontation with them led you to embrace more risk than you would have wanted just because that person was,
Hmm.
so you kind of like lose the ability to protect yourself
Hmm.
in without. But I think there's a difference between containing the spread.
Hmm.
Like at that point, it was like in one city. It was like in Wuhan
Right.
and like a couple other places. So it was like it may be better for the government to like say like no one's leaving the city,
Right.
than it is now for like to just say like the whole economy's shut down because we're trying to contain the spread, even though I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, there is this aspect of like third parties being affected. If I'm going out and just licking doorknobs and like, whatever, and then just
Right.
running through the hospital, touching all the beds, like that's
Yeah.
clearly that should not be allowed. Like, that person is being reckless. And again, to draw the line between reckless behavior versus maybe pushing the boundaries a little bit is hard. It's hard for anyone to say where that line is, let alone the government, which is extremely heavy-handed. And when you're placing sweeping stuff like this, I think it's better to be cautious than. I guess you could interpret cautious in different ways. You might say it's cautious is shutting everything down, but I don't know that it is. I would
Yeah.
say cautious in terms of their actions. What are they actually doing? They have to be cautious with what they actually do and
Hmm.
let people pick up the slack in terms of if they're not doing enough.
It's tough. It's not a. I don't think it's really straightforward. I think the best thing would be, this is kind of a separate issue, but to have like PPE stocked. But
Right.
that's it's kind of too late for that. We just don't have the PP.
But I think
Um,
if we had more of our savings freed up, we did like our government wasn't such a big burden on us for everything that it does spend on. There'd be more room in private markets to prepare for things like this. I think you'd start to see people with
yeah,
like
I
more
agree.
emergency stockpile because they'd have more of their money in their own hands and they'd be supporting the government less. Because it's like if you think about
Yeah,
every tank that the government builds, that came out of individual savings. And what could have that been? If instead of a tank, it could have been PPE or whatever, like in the hands of
right.
people who need it. So like that's what the government doesn't consider.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Uh, it's I like to have these conversations. I keep saying I think it's important to have these conversations now because no one really listens when it's times are good. But like having the conversation of like what should have been done, I think the real solution to this pandemic would have been stuff we should have done.
Hmm.
It's you kind of sound like an asshole when you say that during the pandemic. 'Cause you're like, okay, well, what do we do now? It's like, well, yeah, I don't know, it's tough. But what should have been done is, like you said, if savings were plentiful in a healthy economy, right? The idea of being out of work, if the government says everybody who can stay home from work for the next 6 months, if you have a strong savings account, if you have a strong, rainy day fund, the prospect of staying home for 6 months on end is not a big deal. Like it's
Right.
like, okay, I can still keep going to the store, I can keep providing for myself and buying things. It's like that's fine. Like I have no issue with that. Like a lot of people would be able to say that when you extend yourself, you become this like dependent person. I need to go to my job. I need to work to make money to live. And it's like, why? That all goes back to like the interest rate policy from the Federal Reserve. So that's just another thing. Like, that's like a second order effect that I think is so important to understand when making policy for like
Right.
a situation like this. But that stuff is not talked about. Like, no one talks about the second order effects of having a cash reserve.
Hmm.
It's actually like it's human safety. It's like that's why you need a cash reserve, so you're not dependent on a job or being at a certain place when that place might kill you if there's a pandemic, a dangerous pandemic.
Right. And what John's talking about when he talks about second order effects, like not to like freaking geek out on you guys, but like in engineering, basically any kind of engineering you have, if you ever take any kind of it, uh, stability is going to come up in like your courses. And what stability is it tells you essentially uh, if you have some sort of perturbation on a system, where's it gonna go, right? So like you can imagine a pencil, right? If you somehow manage to balance it on the point of the pencil on a table and have it standing up, okay, we all know that's not stable, right? But if you balance it perfectly, you could look at it and be like, look, it's standing up, it's fine, it's totally fine. It takes what's called a second order analysis to understand that it's not fine. And why it's called second order is because it's a second derivative. You're looking at the second derivative of the forces acting on it. So like essentially gravity is the second derivative of where it's going to go. And that tells you this pencil, if you move it in any direction, it's going down. Whereas if you lay the pencil flat on its side and you nudge it, it's gonna keep laying there. Okay, that's what a second order analysis is. And so when you apply it to complex systems like an economy, it's like the model isn't as clear mathematically, but the mental model is similar. The way of thinking is similar, and in that sense is okay. If we build this economy that's built on spending and consumption, and we just rely on everyone to keep spending and consuming and live and just, whatever money they earn, they just go out and spend it no matter what. That's kind of essentially the way you hear people talk about economics these days. Goes, spending is good, right? Yeah, more spending. Spending is good. That's all they talk about is spending. And they never talk about savings, right? And so when we run into this situation, like John said, where no one has, 6 months of savings lined up, it creates second order effects in the sense that, okay, no one has any savings. So now the government has to go out and basically provide for all the people who have no savings. And then it's like, what are the effects of that? And it may turn out that this is an unstable system. When everyone's living paycheck to paycheck, and then you have any kind of perturbation, volatility, it may actually turn out that that's unstable and the whole thing collapses.
Yeah. That's definitely a good way to put it, or that's a definitely good analogy to draw to like mathematics and calculus. I'm a strong believer. So like what you're saying, I think some people say you can't allow the system to correct for an unstable system. You have to have that government arm in there. That's the only thing that's going to correct that instability. And there's a lot of repercussions to that. I think one, it gets more unstable. The more it relies on an external hand of government to maintain stability, the less stable it becomes. Negative feedback cycle. But then also, I'm a strong believer that for an unstable system, the only way to solve for that, like in a free market, is like generations of learning.
Right.
Right. If your grandfather, worked somewhere and he was dependent on his salary, and then something happened to his job and the government saved him, well, then his son might do the same thing because he's just like, oh, the government saved me, so you can do the same thing. And then his son, might do the same thing. Oh, the government saved me here, and the government. So just, you don't really have to have a strong savings account. If your father and your grandfather don't stress to you the importance of a savings, a rainy day fund, then you're probably not gonna. It's not gonna be instilled in you. I think it's like like the things you learn from your parents are like the strongest lessons. And when your parents are instilled, like if there's like a crisis and their ass gets handed to them, and then they're like, well, that was terrible. What should I have done differently? Oh, I should maybe, if I couldn't develop a savings account, then maybe having two skills. One where I do my day job, and then another, if I can't do my day job anymore, I'll do another thing that's a source of income. If I, just like that form of optionality of just like having your life not dependent on one scenario being true forever. That's like something you get, it gets ingrained in you, and then you pass that on to your community and your, offspring. And I think that's the only really way that you can like go away from that instability is like a slow, multi-generational like value instillment of this, of like what's a good principle to live by.
Right, for sure. And another reason why, I think government solutions are inherently unstable is because they tend to revolve around steady state. And what I mean by that is think about like unemployment benefits. When they were deciding on like what they should do for unemployment benefits, they built that model around, just a stable economy and the numbers they were seeing at that time. That's like what you could say steady state, like it's a stable equilibrium at that point. But then now that you have this like unemployment benefits, like you're not accounting for, okay, and so that's baked into the budget, and you're going to be like, okay, this is the amount of money we're going to dish out for unemployment every year. Okay, but now what happens when you have a crisis like you do? Okay, now suddenly unemployment goes up to 30%. That's unheard of. We never that wasn't baked into their model. So now suddenly they're dishing out a ton more money on unemployment. What else is happening? They're actually getting less money in taxes because less people are working. The economy slices apart. So there's actually less revenue for them to use. They have to dish out more money, and all the other things they plan to spend on are still there. And so this is an example of second order effect that it's not just that there's more unemployment, you're actually getting less revenue. And then there's a feedback loop there because while they can either cancel everything and start over, which never happens, or they double down and they take out a bunch of debt and try to cover their obligations, or they have the Fed come in and print it. And now you may be able to get back to stability, but at a lower level. And so you may become stable again, but you've basically baked into the cake a bunch of crap.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean these examples I can speak personally about. So I think that for me, when I was told, once I started working and started making money, I was told to, have 6 months of living expenses in a savings account, in cash, liquid, ready to be spent. And I worked for a year, 2 years, and I was just thinking about what's the actual scenario that I need money to let I have credit cards and stuff. I could put some expenses on that, and I have like even if I lose my job, like I wasn't like worried about like having. Why would I need an immediate like cash on hand? And I think that's just a reflection of like none of our parents, grandparents, our whole society, the instillment of like social programs like Jeff you're talking about, having like a welfare state that's like not or it is susceptible to unplanned second order effects, like that kind of never really affected our culture. And I think when it got to me, I was like, yeah, do I even need one? I was like, I should have one probably. So I have one, but I was like, I'm just gonna do this because I think that it could be something. You know what I mean? It was nothing I was planning, nothing. But it's just like that's the whole theme of this like conversation. It's like you have to do things to maintain optionality, even though it's not something you're planning for. It's got to be something. It's just like you got to keep that open option for what you don't plan for. All right. Well, what else?
I think that was a good session.
That was good. Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for doing less. See you next week.
Yeah. Take it easy.